Hello, this is Matt on the Moon Lambo channel. Is the Howey test a 3-part test or a 4-part test? Well, that's the subject of this latest Moon Lambo hot jam. Attorney John Deaton broached the subject. And it's something that I've talked about, but Attorney Deaton went into greater detail here. And he did end up pointing one of the key things that I've been arguing for, at this point, over a year, because it was either, if memory serves, the end of August of last year or the beginning part of September, when Gary Gensler at the Aspen Security Forum stated that the Howey test was a 3-part test, when pretty much everybody's understanding is that it's a 4-part test. And Gary Gensler did something that is completely unacceptable and inappropriate, because he removed unilaterally a crucial factor in determining whether or not something is a security. Now, it doesn't mean he gets away with that, but that's what he's attempting to do at a minimum. So we'll go ahead and break it all down for you. But before going further, I do want to be clear that I do not have a legal or financial background of any kind. I am not offering legal or financial advice, and you definitely should not buy or sell anything because of anything I say or write. I'm just an enthusiast who enjoys making YouTube videos about crypto-related topics, but just as a hobby and just for fun. And so here's what Attorney Deaton had to say on this topic. Is Howey a 3 or 4-part test? And I will pause and note, all prongs of Howey must be satisfied in order for something to pass the Howey test. And if something passes the Howey test, that means it is a security. It is an investment contract. And so Attorney Deaton says, in the Howey case itself, the Supreme Court articulated the test 2 separate times in the opinion. The first time, the Supreme Court writes, and this is a quote, "An investment contract for purposes of the Securities Act means a contract, transaction, or scheme whereby a person invests his money in a common enterprise and is led to expect profits solely from the efforts of the promoter or a third party." And I will pause a note here too, and I don't think Deaton mentioned this in this thread, but the solely aspect, because again it says, expect profits solely from the efforts of a promoter or a third party. The solely part meaning the requirement of one individual or entity. That seems to have been thrown out in subsequent cases, and it became, as a result, precedent. And that's kind of unfortunate because, like, what is the SEC even alleging? I mean, if they were alleging that it was just Ripple and that's the common enterprise, then that would make it easier to throw out. Now, if you watch one of my recent videos, that's not actually what they're arguing. They're arguing that everything that touches XRP is part of the common enterprise. So even Time Magazine, and I mentioned this in a recent video, even Time Magazine, because they accept XRP as payment, you're in a common enterprise with Time Magazine. That's how absurd all of this is here. Anyway, Attorney Deaton continues. Several pages later, the Supreme Court articulates the test exactly like this, and here's another quote. "The test is whether the scheme involves an investment of money in a common enterprise with profits to come solely from the efforts of others," end quote. As an aside, the next sentence after the one I just quoted is, in my opinion, very important, even though the Ripple lawyers haven't raised it. I will. And here's the quote. "If that test be satisfied, it is immaterial whether the enterprise is speculative or non-speculative, or whether there is a sale of property with or without intrinsic value," end quote. The SEC loves talking about speculation, but speculation is irrelevant. Only the test is. So let's pause here to think about this. If you've read the stuff that the SEC's been putting out in their legal briefs, or even if you haven't read it yourself and you've just been following what's going on in crypto media or on YouTube channels like Moon Lambo, which is, by the way, the best YouTube channel on all of the YouTubes, in fact. That's a fun scientific fact for you. You may be aware that the SEC has been arguing this. They've been arguing that there's rampant speculation, and why are they doing that? When the Supreme Court has made it very clear that speculation is completely irrelevant to it. Well, it's because it stirs up emotions. That's a big part of it, I would think, anyway. And also because the SEC doesn't actually care about legal precedent and the law. So there's that as well. I'll give you that. Attorney Deaton continues. Back to the question of whether Howey is a 3 or 4-part test. The answer is that some lower courts have broken the test up into 4 factors, and some lower courts have broken it up into 3. I myself have said 4 because it is easier to explain, but the truth is there are 3 Howey factors. But the third factor has 2 components, however. The judge in Library discussed the second part of the third prong of the Howey test. So think about that. The second part of the third prong. So whether you count it as 3 or 4, like there's 4 things being considered. So you can shove 2 of those things into one prong, or you could just say there's 4 prongs. It doesn't matter. As long as all things are considered anyway, then it doesn't matter. Now that's not what Gensler is doing, as you'll see. Attorney Deaton continues. Regardless, what matters to Judge Torres in the Ripple case is what the court above her, the Second Circuit, has decided. Judge Torres is bound to apply the law based on Second Circuit precedent. The Second Circuit, in the Revick case, has described Howey as a 3-part test. And here's a quote from the Revick case. The 3 elements of the Howey test must all be present for a land sale contract to constitute a security. Number 1, an investment of money. 2, in a common enterprise. 3, with profits to be derived solely from the efforts of others. And so there you go. That third prong, that's the expectation of profit and on the efforts of others. So there you can see 2 prongs reduced down to 1 simple little prong. Okay, whatever. But the reason it matters is because of what Gary Gensler is doing with this and what he is trying to get away with, it seems. Attorney Deaton continues. Gary Gensler always says Howey is a 3-factor test, but he ignores the common enterprise factor. To make things even more confusing for people is that the SEC in its motion for summary judgment argues a 4-factor test, adding a new prong. Pause to think about this. Gary Gensler, when he says there's a 3-prong test, because again, there's 4 components, he throws out the common enterprise. So he says it's just an investment of money, number 1, 2, with the expectation of profits, 3 on the efforts of others. He just threw out the common enterprise. You know, Supreme Court be damned, Second Circuit be damned. That's Gary Gensler's, because he's Kim Jong-Gensler, supreme dictator, dictator and supreme leader, whatever. That's that little asset. That's what he's doing. And that's what he'd have you. And so if you're the SEC, you don't care about the law. You don't care about legal precedent. You just say stuff if you think it would be good for you. That's what you do, because you're a bunch of pricks at the SEC. That's the truth. Attorney Deaton continues. The SEC spends most of its motion on showing Ripple marketed XRP as an investment and that XRP investors reasonably expected to profit. That's when they bring up speculation by XRP holders trying to tie it to Ripple's marketing efforts. The bottom line is that it is an S-word show because the SEC is making S-word up as it goes. I just wanted to clarify the 3 or 4-part test because I won't be surprised to see Ripple address this in its opposition brief to the SEC's motion. Ripple will continue to rely heavily on Revick. And so there you go. The SEC can pretend like common enterprise doesn't matter. It can add its own separate prong talking about speculation, which is a bunch of BS. There's no legal precedent for it, but they're not going to get away with that if justice is done. And I think justice will be done. Now, David Schwartz, who of course is Ripple CTO, co-creator of the XRP Ledger, responded to Attorney Deaton in this thread, and he said, I wonder if there's any case law on whether the profits from the efforts of others is a subjective test. Did buyers actually expect that? An objective expectation test, would a reasonable buyer expect that? Or a factual test, is that what profits could actually come from? Which is, I think, an excellent question, and Attorney Deaton answered. He said, the third one has been implicitly rejected. The SEC, of course, has argued the first 2 when it suits them. In Telegram, the SEC argued subjectively they expected profits from the initial purchase contracts. In Library, evidence showed many didn't expect profits. SEC argued objectively. So isn't that funny? Whatever suits them at the time. They'll say objectively, then they'll say subjectively, whatever they think suits them in the moment because they're disingenuous pricks. That's what they are. These are bad people. They are monsters. And then there's an XRP community member named Andy who responded to Attorney Deaton and wrote, relax, Ripple has this covered, which seems, it's not the worst thing I've ever read, but it seems a little bit unnecessarily aggressive. Attorney Deaton is, sharing his wisdom with the XRP community. I appreciate it, so I don't know why you want to tell him to relax, but setting that aside, Attorney Deaton did respond, and he said, as I said to the judge, and she agreed because she granted Amici status, We didn't rely on Ripple when we bought XRP, so we are not going to rely on Ripple to protect our interests, especially considering that Ripple's primarily defense, he means primary defense, is that they don't owe XRP holders a damn thing. Well said, Attorney Deaton. Exactly. And I'm happy that Attorney Deaton is sharing his knowledge consistently. He's on social media every single day, dropping knowledge bombs. I appreciate that. That's why I highlight so much of it on my Moon Lambo channel, which again, of course, is the best channel on all of the YouTubes. There's science to back that, I promise you. I'm not a financial advisor. You should not buy or sell anything because of anything I say or write. That would be a very, very, very bad idea. Until next time, to the Moon Lambo.